Welcome to South Florida saltwater fishing. I'm Heath, and it's time to get into the bite.
Dolphin in the boat, baby!
You having fun?
Nice tail fish on a white bucktail jig. And we're off just like that! That's a rosie right there, man.
Alright folks, in this episode we are going to go over the difference between fishing regulations in state waters versus federal waters. Before we get into this though, if you want to learn more about fishing, grow as an angler, or just see some great and exciting offshore fishing adventures, you can start by hitting the subscribe button. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss a thing. Alright folks, so like I said, state waters versus federal waters. We're going to go over exactly what these areas are and define them for you. We're also going to cover some of the differences in regulations between size and daily catch limits. And I'm going to discuss how to circumvent and find loopholes in these regulations. And one of the more important things is I'm going to show you how to make sure you have proof of where and when you have been fishing in either of these areas. Alright, so let's get right into this. State waters off Florida on the Atlantic coast extend out 3 nautical miles. On the Gulf Coast, they extend out 9 nautical miles. After 3 nautical miles on the Atlantic coast, you are in federal waters. After 9 nautical miles on the Gulf Coast, you are in federal waters. So on this map, you can see the blue highlighted zone that shows the area that the FWC is responsible for, including the 3 nautical mile line on the Atlantic and the 9 nautical mile line on the Gulf. Now, federal waters are what's known as the EEZ. That stands for the Exclusive Economic Zone. In the South Atlantic, this area covers North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, all the way down to Key West. This is known as the South Atlantic States Defined Fishery Management Area. Now, in most places, federal waters extend out 200 miles unless they run into another country's federal waters. Now, in these federal waters near Melbourne, Florida, the federal water zones shrink from about 200 miles out down to around 50 miles out. And then as we head further south, they sort of shrink into about 25 miles out, down around the Tri-County area of Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami. Why does this happen? Because in that area, our federal waters directly come in contact with the federal waters of the Bahamas. And the last thing about federal waters, once you are outside of the federal waters zone, you are in what is considered international waters, which has a whole other set of rules. So what's all this got to do with fishing? Well, there are different regulations concerning per person, also known as daily bag limits and vessel limits. Also, seasonal closures may differ concerning different species, meaning the season for a specific species might be closed in state waters when it's still open in federal, or vice versa. Okay, so how do we prove whether we are fishing in state waters or federal waters? This is easy. Your proof is in your GPS tracking line. So if you look on your GPS and you've never cleared your active tracks, it's going to be hard to prove where you were going and what you did on the specific day you went out. So my suggestion is you can save tracks in a saved track area on your GPS, but always try to have what is known as your active tracks cleared, so on that specific day when you're going out, you have proof of where you've gone and what you've done. And you'll need this just in case you get checked by the state or the federal authorities. GPS active tracks have telltale signs of fishing, such as circling in the same general area or a stop point where the boat looks like it has begun to drift. So let me give you some visual examples of this. We are going to call this line here our 3 nautical mile line. So if your track on your GPS shows your boat coming out here and you're doing a bunch of drifts in and out of here, in and out of here, and then it shows you went back and you went home. All day you were fishing in state waters. And out here is our federal waters. Now, if your track shows that you left port and you came and you did a bunch of drifts, and then you left and you went back to port. Right here it shows that you may have crossed into federal waters briefly, but it has no signs of you stopping to fish. It looks like one straight line where you just happen to cross over into federal waters. And now the same thing works in the opposite. Let's say you leave port and you head way out offshore and you're trolling. And you're going back and forth, and then you just come in and you head straight back. That is evidence that you were only fishing offshore in federal waters all day. And now if you've got an active track that looks like this, where you've gone offshore and you trolled around, and then you came back in and you did some drifts, or you stopped and then you went back to port, well, this is obvious signs that you were fishing in both federal and state waters. So in this instance, if you have a fish that's regulated differently in state versus federal waters, it would be very hard to prove that you caught it in either or. And just to conclude on this, let's say you've gone out again and you were out trolling all day. And we're heading back in and our boat comes to a stop. And then you start to see a straight line because you were drifting in the current. And then you go back to port. This is also an indication that you had stopped to fish. So just be wary if you make a stop that an anomaly like this on your GPS track to either the FWC or the Coast Guard, that shows that you stopped and were more than likely fishing. Okay, so the first fish we're going to start off with is a great example. We're going to start off with black grouper. The FWC has fishing for black grouper in the Gulf side state waters open year round. And then on the Atlantic side, the FWC has the black grouper season open from May 1st through December 31st. Meaning black grouper is closed in the Atlantic from January 1st to April 30th. And the Atlantic federal waters also have that same season for black grouper. They are closed from January 1st to April 30th. They're open from May 1st to December 31st. So you can see there's a difference between the seasonal closure for this species between the Gulf side and the Atlantic side. So this shows that the federal and state waters on the Atlantic side are the same, yet they're different on the Gulf side. Which means you can catch black grouper all year round on the Gulf side, just as long as your GPS track shows you stayed within that 9 nautical mile line on the Gulf side, and if you did cross over it, it doesn't look like you had any intention of fishing. Now let's also notice that our bag limits are different for black grouper. In state waters in the Gulf, you are allowed to possess 4 groupers within the grouper aggregate. And all 4 of these fish can be black grouper. Now in state waters on the Atlantic side, you're only allowed to have 3 fish within the grouper aggregate, and only 1 of these can be a black grouper. And the regulation for the South Atlantic federal waters follows suit with the state waters. You can only have 3 fish in the grouper aggregate, and only 1 of them can also be a black grouper. So the black grouper is a great example of a fish that has seasonal differences and daily bag limit differences when it comes to examining state waters versus federal waters. Alright, and now I want to talk about tilefish. Blue line tilefish and golden tilefish are both in the grouper aggregate. And of the 2 species, the one I want to really talk about is blue line tilefish, since they're a special case off the east coast of Florida. So when it comes to blue line tilefish, in the South Atlantic fishery management area, daily bag limit being 2 fish. Blue line tilefish are also in the grouper aggregate. So this poses a dilemma. Let's say you've caught 2 grouper and you want to go catch tilefish. You can only catch 1 tilefish because they're part of that 3 fish aggregate in the South Atlantic. Or let's say you went tile fishing first and you caught your limit of 2 and now you want to go for grouper. Well, you can't catch 3 grouper, you can only catch 1 grouper because it's part of a 3 fish aggregate in the South Atlantic off the east coast of Florida. And now let's talk about the Gulf side. In state waters for the Gulf, blue line tilefish is open year-round. However, you are not going to find tilefish in state waters on the Gulf side. 9 miles out on the Gulf side, you're still in water that's very shallow. Tilefish are found in 400 to 500 feet. And now back on the Atlantic side, for the state and the federal waters, blue line tilefish has a season that runs from May 1st through August 31st, which is only 4 months to fish for them versus the state waters on the Gulf side where they're year round, but you're not going to find them. Now this year in particular, 2024, NOAA is going to shorten the federal waters fishing season for blue line tilefish. It is only going to be open from May 1st through July 19th. So you've got a little over 2.5 months to fish for them. And they're going to cut the season short because they predict that the recreational catch limit will be reached early. This weight limit is 116,820 pounds. Now remember, this is for the South Atlantic region that is covered from North Carolina all the way down to Key West, Florida. So 116,000, almost 117,000 pounds of fish is not that much. But you got to consider the massive amount of fishermen that are going to go out and try to harvest these fish. And that's the reason that they are shortening the federal water fishing for this fish. Because in most areas, as I'm going to explain, you have to be in federal waters to catch them. You are way further out than 3 nautical miles. However, in southeast Florida, in the Tri-County area especially, from Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade counties, there are certain areas where you can get to the tile fishing grounds and still be in state waters. Especially off Pompano Beach and Delray Beach, where I have fished for them. I know for a fact that I am in state waters. So you can get that little bit of that seasonal fishing extension all the way through till the end of August in these areas. So what I'm getting at is these particular areas of Florida form a sort of natural loophole to help you circumvent this particular fishing regulation. So I say the Tri-County area for a specific reason. Our reef system is different and it drops off sharply very quickly between us and the Bahamas. Further down south in the Keys, more north up towards Orlando, Jacksonville, it takes a good amount of travel to get out to these depths where tilefish are found. And by the time you get out to them, you are well into federal waters. And what this means is their fishery is pretty much regulated solely by the federal waters. Whereas in the Tri-County area where we drop off deeper, we have that little loophole, like I told you. And just remember, if you are going to fish for tilefish during that particular time of year, just make sure that your GPS track shows that you have stayed in state waters while fishing and you have no intention of doing fishing in federal waters. And now the last fish I want to talk about is mahi. We're going to talk about mahi because there is a difference when it comes to state waters versus federal waters and your daily bag and vessel limits. So first, in Gulf state waters, mahi have no size limit. Next, the daily catch limit is 10 per person or 60 per vessel. However, you're not likely to catch them in Gulf state waters. As I stated before, 9 miles out, you're still in very shallow water. You have to travel a great distance before you get off the reef and you are able to start fishing for a pelagic fish like mahi. Kind of makes you wonder why that daily bag limit is so high and the size limit is non-existent in these state waters. And now we're going to talk about the Atlantic side when it comes to catching mahi. First, in Florida state waters, there is a minimum size limit of 20 inches to the fork. And in state waters, the daily bag limit is 5 fish per person or 30 fish per vessel, whichever is less. And that means if you've got 2 people on your boat, you can only catch 10. You can't catch 30. And now in the federal Atlantic waters, the daily bag limit is different. It's 10 per person or 54 per vessel. So there is a sizable difference when it comes to daily bag limits between state and federal waters. So this really applies more to places like the Florida Keys or the more north areas of Orlando heading up into Jacksonville. In the Keys, you have to head out at least 9 miles to be able to get off that reef and be able to start looking for mahi. And in the Orlando and further up areas, you almost have to travel out 30 miles before you're in water deep enough to start looking for these. In both these areas, what that means is you are well past state waters and you're into federal waters when you are fishing for mahi. So again, in these areas, you are guided by the federal waters regulations. And what this means is your daily bag limit is higher than if you were fishing for them in state waters. And remember, if you're in those federal waters and you have to pass through state waters, obviously, to get back home, if you've caught mahi, just make sure that your GPS track shows no intention of fishing as you have passed through and beyond state waters in both ways, and you will be able to fish for the federal daily bag limit. Alright folks, that about does it for this episode. Hope you had fun, hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned a little bit about the differences between state and federal waters and the regulations when it comes to size limits, daily bag limits, and sometimes how you can find a little bit of a loophole and still fish for that fish that might be closed in one area when it's not in another. Till next time, South Florida saltwater fishing, going wherever the cool wind takes us.